Ross is standing in Monica and Rachel's apartment, still insisting that they were on a break. Rachel isn't yelling anymore, and somehow that makes the scene more devastating. She doesn't tell him she stopped loving him. She tells him she sees him differently now. What happened changed something she doesn't know how to repair. Trust has just left the room, but love didn't. Before this morning, the question was whether Ross and Rachel would ever get together. After it, every fight, every new relationship, and every reunion could become more proof that they still belong together. Separation didn't close their story. It became the engine of it. When most of us remember Ross and Rachel, we remember the yearning, the prom video, the drunken wedding, Rachel getting off the plane. What becomes clearer when you watch Friends again, as an adult, is how much of their romance depends on them not being okay. The show made the ache of almost feel meaningful. It made two people loving each other, but failing to make the relationship work feel more romantic than two people simply building a life together. And that pattern starts much earlier than their breakup. Look at the episode, the one where Ross finds out. Ross is already dating Julie when Rachel, drunk and hurt, leaves him a voicemail admitting she has feelings for him. He hears the message and confronts her at Central Perk. They don't calmly talk through what it means. Instead, they have a blow-up. Ross walks out. Rachel locks the door behind him, partly out of anger and partly because she has no idea what to do with what she just admitted. Then Ross comes back. Their first real kiss grows directly out of the argument that came before it. Friends is already showing us what gives Ross and Rachel their charge. It isn't comfort or compatibility. It's frustration, delay, and the feeling that something keeps getting in the way at the exact moment they might finally give each other a chance. Later that season, the prom video turns waiting into romance in a completely different way. Rachel already knows Ross had feelings for her in high school. That isn't the surprise. The surprise is seeing what happened on the night of her prom. When Rachel's date appears to have stood her up, Ross steps in to be her hero. He gets dressed, picks up flowers, and prepares to take her himself. But before Rachel ever sees him, her date arrives. She leaves for the dance, and Ross is left standing there with the flowers, ready to offer something she never knew he was looking to give. Years later, Rachel watches that moment on an old home video. Suddenly, an old disappointment has a new meaning. What she remembers as the night her date nearly abandoned her becomes evidence that Ross had been there all along. Rachel is touched. She kisses him because her version of the past has just changed in front of her. Between that first kiss and the prom video, Friends builds the emotional language it will keep using for the rest of the series. Conflict makes desire urgent. Delay makes devotion retroactive. Missed timing becomes evidence that the connection was always there, even when their relationship wasn't. Very little of Ross and Rachel's early romance comes from things being easy. Once they finally become a stable couple, the story needs a different question. Rachel begins building a career at Bloomingdale's, and for the first time, an important part of her life has nothing to do with Ross. She has a coworker named Mark, who works there too, and Ross immediately sees him as a threat. Rachel genuinely wants an identity outside of being Ross's girlfriend. Her career matters to her. She wants room to grow into a version of herself she has only recently started to discover. Ross genuinely believes the relationship is in danger. He thinks staying close, showing up, and involving himself in that part of Rachel's life will protect what they have. But Rachel experiences that as pressure. She needs room. Ross experiences room as distance, and distance is the beginning of being left behind. Their anniversary fight at Rachel's office isn't simply two people behaving irrationally. It's two real emotional needs that don't fit together cleanly. Rachel wants independence without losing the relationship. Ross wants reassurance without realizing how much his need for it is crowding her. Before they became a couple, the question was whether they would choose each other. Once the "will they" has been answered, their relationship still works emotionally. It just stops working as a question. Can they stay together? With Ross and Rachel, Friends repeatedly returns to uncertainty as the thing that keeps the romance alive. So the story gives itself a new reason to make us wait. Go back to the scene, the morning after the break, and look at what the scene leaves behind. After Rachel suggests they take a break, Ross sleeps with Chloe. By the next morning, Rachel wants to confront Ross and tell him they made a mistake, but eventually finds out what he did. Ross tries to defend himself by arguing about what the break technically meant, but the scene quickly moves beyond the technicality. There's a version of this confrontation the show could have played, mostly for laughs. It doesn't. Ross moves from defending himself to begging Rachel not to end the relationship. Rachel is devastated, but she remains tender, even as she tells him to leave. She's crying because she still loves him. He's pleading because he knows that love is no longer enough to repair what happened. That's why the breakup doesn't feel complete. If Rachel had stopped loving him, it could have been an ending. But because the affection survives, the breakup becomes something the story can keep returning to. What remains is love without trust, want without access, a whole shared history with nowhere left to file it. Every argument afterward carries the weight of what happened. Every new person one of them dates becomes part of the unfinished story. Every jealous look feels like proof that the breakup never fully worked. Ross and Rachel stop being two people trying to keep a relationship together. They become two people who keep proving, often against their better judgment, that they still can't completely let each other go. This is the major reason as to why their other relationships work so strangely inside the show. Take Ross's relationship with Emily, for example. Emily isn't just an obstacle placed between Ross and Rachel. Ross genuinely falls in love with her. He proposes, travels to London for the wedding, and tries to build a real future with her. Then, at the altar, while marrying Emily, he says Rachel's name instead of hers. It's a disaster for the marriage he's trying to have. But it's something else entirely for the story we're watching. Ross can build an entirely new life, stand in front of everyone he loves, and still fail to keep Rachel out of the moment. The show turns a humiliating betrayal of Emily into more evidence that Ross and Rachel's connection cannot be escaped. That doesn't make what happens to Emily less cruel. The scene works because the marriage is real, and the damage matters. But within the larger story, Emily's pain also becomes another way of proving that to Ross, Rachel still matters most. Bonnie, Tag, and eventually Joey serve versions of the same function. Every attempt to move on becomes another way of showing that Ross and Rachel belong together. The episode, the one with the jellyfish, gives us one of the clearest examples of this cycle. Rachel becomes jealous of Ross's relationship with Bonnie, and finally admits she still has feelings for him. Ross ends things with Bonnie and goes back to Rachel. For a moment, it feels like the reunion viewers have been waiting for. Then Rachel gives him an 18-page letter, front and back, explaining what she needs him to understand before they can be together again. Ross falls asleep while reading it. The next morning, he tells Rachel he agrees with what she wrote, even though he doesn't fully know what he has agreed to. Rachel believes the original conflict has finally been resolved. Ross believes getting back together matters more than continuing the argument. The reunion is built on a misunderstanding neither of them wants to examine too closely. Ross still doesn't believe he should accept full responsibility for what happened. Rachel still needs that responsibility acknowledged before she can trust him again. They haven't solved the problem. They've reached the emotional reward before doing the work that would allow it to last. By this point, Friends has created a loop that feels almost like destiny. Distance creates longing. Longing creates a reunion. The reunion makes all the waiting feel worthwhile. But because the original conflict remains unresolved, the reward cannot last. The show separates them again, and the cycle starts over. It's worth stopping here because Friends clearly knows how to write lasting love without removing conflict. Monica and Chandler face infertility, adoption, career changes, and the fear that the life they imagined may not happen the way they expected. Those stories create real pain, but the uncertainty exists inside the commitment. The question isn't whether they will stay together, it's how they will face what comes next together. With Ross and Rachel, the drama usually lives somewhere else. The question is whether the commitment gets to exist at all, and that raises the real question underneath the entire rewatch. Why did the couple who kept failing to stay together become the defining romance of Friends? Look back at these moments the show asks us to remember. Their first kiss happens because of an argument. The prom video turns an old moment of pain into evidence of devotion. Their break leaves love standing in the wreckage after trust is gone. The beach reunion is driven by jealousy and held together by a letter Ross never fully reads. Ross says Rachel's name while marrying someone else, and the show turns that disaster into proof that Rachel still matters most. Even the finale depends on one last separation, one last race against time, and one last moment when it appears they may have missed each other again. Their most iconic moments rarely come from Ross and Rachel simply being good together on an ordinary day. Nearly all of it comes from what they survive. None of that means their connection isn't real. The chemistry is real, the affection is real, their history matters, and by the time they're raising their daughter Emma together, there is a real friendship underneath all the damage and confusion. That's exactly why the pattern works so well. When we watch them, intensity can begin to feel deeper than peace. Waiting can feel more romantic than compatibility. Surviving pain can feel more meaningful than simply being happy with someone. A relationship that never receives full closure can start to feel larger than the ordinary relationship it might have become. We thought the pain was what Ross and Rachel had to survive before they could become the love story. Watching it now, it looks more like the pain was how Friends kept proving they were the love story all along, which is exactly how the show chooses to end them. Rachel accepts a job in Paris. Ross realizes, almost too late, that he doesn't want her to go. He races to the airport and tells her how he feels, but she boards the plane anyway. Later, Ross listens to her voicemail. Rachel is clearly reconsidering. She tries to get off the plane, but the message cuts out before Ross hears what happened. He's left standing in his apartment, shouting at the answering machine because he still doesn't know whether he reached her in time. Then Rachel appears in the doorway. "I got off the plane." It's a huge moment, and the reaction it gets is earned. The series has spent years building toward the feeling of those 5 words. But look at what the finale resolves, and what it leaves untouched. It answers whether Ross and Rachel will finally choose each other. It doesn't show us how Rachel's career fits into that choice, whether Ross has learned to support her independence without treating it as a threat, or how they rebuild trust once there is no longer another reunion to wait for. The show resolves the question of destiny. It ends before it has to test that destiny through ordinary life. Go back to the morning after the breakup. Ross is explaining. Rachel is still standing in front of him, but emotionally she is already gone. Now place that scene next to Rachel standing in his doorway and saying, "I got off the plane." Most of the series exists between those 2 moments, and almost everything in between teaches us to find the distance between them more romantic than simply watching them stay together. Friends made Ross and Rachel feel destined by making separation feel more romantic than stability. Every interruption kept the possibility of them alive. Every reunion made the waiting feel worthwhile. And the series ended at the exact moment it would finally have to stop asking us to wait. So were Ross and Rachel truly compatible? Or did Friends make their inability to stay together feel like proof that they belong together? Let me know where you land in the comments. And if you enjoy revisiting the shows and relationships that raised us through an adult lens, subscribe to Millennial Rewind. Sometimes growing up doesn't change the story, it changes what we finally notice.